Welcome back to our quiet space. Leave the noise of today outside the door. Now, find a comfortable position. Relax your forehead, let your shoulders fall, and let your body sink into the soft mattress. Let your mind drift to the distant land of Galilee more than 2,000 years ago, where the dusty roads, the silent olive groves, and the rustling desert winds. Tonight, we are not looking for miracles, but simply following in the footsteps of a great traveler from the past. No pressure, no judgment, just listen. Let the story of God's life gently lull you into a peaceful sleep. They nailed him to the cross, buried his body in a cold stone tomb, and thought that everything was over. But from that very moment where ultimate pain blended with the darkness of mankind, a light arose. More than 2,000 years have passed, yet perhaps the world has never needed that message as much as it does now to save the souls lost amidst materialism and desire. And thus began the journey of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. In tonight's episode, the sleepless historian will take you back to the life journey of Jesus Christ, the light of the world, to contemplate the moments of his life, and from there, deepen our souls and our understanding. A cold night in the region of Bethlehem, stars covering the sky. In a small stable glimmered the faint light of a lamp. No throne, no silk, only the smell of dry grass and the bleating of sheep in the wind. There, in the poorest corner of the world, a baby cried out for the first time, the child whom history would call Jesus Christ, the Son of God. His mother, Mary, was only a young girl, and Joseph, the humble carpenter, still could not understand why God had chosen them to begin such a divine mission. At that time, Rome ruled nearly the entire Western world. Emperor Augustus had issued a decree for a census, forcing Joseph and Mary to leave Nazareth and go to Bethlehem. And that very journey, which seemed like mere coincidence, became the key to an ancient prophecy that the Savior would be born in the city of David. No one could have imagined that the one called the Son of God would come in the form of a child in the night, in a stable. But that was the first paradox in the story of Jesus. Light is not born amidst light. It appears in the darkest place. Out in the fields, shepherds, the class considered the lowest in Jewish society, suddenly saw the sky ablaze with light. An angel appeared to them and said, "Today, the Savior has been born for you." And far away in the east, 3 wise men, the Magi, followed a strange star. They did not know the child's name, only that a new king had come into the world. They brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh, 3 gifts with mysterious meanings: gold for kingship, frankincense for divinity, and myrrh for death. A fragile omen that from the moment of birth, the journey of this child already carried the shadow of sacrifice. In that small stable, amid the breathing of animals, Mary held her baby. No angels, no miracles, only a mother looking at her child with anxious eyes, knowing his life would not be ordinary. Joseph stood beside her, silent. He said nothing, but his rough hands rested on his wife's shoulder as if praying for the 2 of them. And for the world that did not yet know, it would soon tremble at the name Jesus of Nazareth. A lesser-known detail ancient manuscripts tell that on that night there was a star so bright that it cast long shadows on the ground, yet did not fade for 3 days. Centuries later, astronomers tried to explain it as the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. But to those in Bethlehem, it was no natural phenomenon. It was a sign that the world had changed. In later years, historians would argue about the true date of Jesus' birth, but whether it was in December, Nisan, or any other season, that day was remembered not for its time, but for its meaning. Because in a world drowned in war, injustice, and slavery, the arrival of a child without weapons, without power, was promised to bring peace on earth to those of goodwill. That was the humble beginning of an extraordinary journey. And if you look back, you will see that the greatest miracle did not lie in the star, nor in the angels, but in the way God chose to enter the world as an ordinary human being. For only in that way could he understand the fear, the tears, and the wounds of the very people he came to save. After Herod, king of Judea, ordered the massacre of all male infants in Bethlehem, an act meant to destroy the newly born king of the Jews, Joseph was warned in a dream. He hurriedly took Mary and the child Jesus and fled to Egypt. They lived hidden among pagans, nameless and poor, for many years. And then, when Herod died, that small family returned home, choosing to live in a small village called Nazareth. At that time, Nazareth was nothing more than a tiny dot on the map, a dusty farming village, barely known. But it was in that quiet place that Jesus grew up like any other child, learning to speak, to work, and to love. There were no palaces, no miracles, only a boy with gentle eyes who often asked questions that made adults uneasy. One day, it is said, Jesus helped his father build a table. When the wood was cut unevenly, instead of throwing it away, he gently adjusted it, using a wedge to make the surface flat. Sometimes, he said, what is crooked only needs to be steadied by patience. That saying, simple as it seemed, appeared to foretell his entire life, a journey balancing between humanity and divinity, between love and suffering. During his youth, Jesus often followed his mother to the synagogue to learn the scriptures. People said that he listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, his words astonished the elders. At 12 years old, during a pilgrimage to the Temple of Jerusalem, he was lost. 3 days later, his parents found him debating with scholars, speaking of the law with understanding far beyond his age. When Mary reproached him, "My child, why have you made your father and me anxious like this?" he simply answered, "I must be in my Father's house." That answer left everyone stunned. A child spoke with such calm certainty, as if he already knew exactly who he was and that the road ahead was calling his name. After that, history falls almost silent for 18 years. There are no clear records of the time between his youth and his 30th year. Scholars call this period the silent years. People believe he lived with Joseph, continued his carpentry work, helped neighbors, and prayed every day. a simple life without fame, yet perhaps within that silence. He was watching, learning compassion, waiting for the moment when the world would need the light. A little-known detail: researchers discovered that in the first century, the region of Nazareth had only about 400 people, mostly farmers and carpenters. This makes the later Jewish saying even clearer: can anything good come from Nazareth? And thus, from a place despised by the world. He began. If you ever thought greatness always starts with noise, remember, Jesus began with silence. No tower, no entourage, only a carpenter, bent over wooden planks, watching sunlight drift through the window as he pondered things beyond human grasp. Perhaps, during those years, he learned the most important truth: that power does not come from strength, but from humility. And when the time came, that calling echoing from deep within his soul would lead him to the Jordan River, where destiny would finally unfold. 30 years had passed since that night in Bethlehem. The child who once slept in a manger was now a quiet man, with deep eyes and a voice gentle as water. No one knew what he had thought or done during those years. But one day, he left Nazareth, walking dozens of kilometers southward toward the Jordan River. There, a man was stirring up all of Judea: John the Baptist, dressed in camel's hair, eating locusts and wild honey, preaching repentance and baptism. Thousands came to hear him speak of the coming Savior. But John declared, "He who comes after me is greater than I, whose sandal strap I am not worthy to untie." Then one morning, when the mist still hung over the water, Jesus appeared. John recognized him, froze, and exclaimed, "It is you who should baptize me." But Jesus only smiled. "Let it be so now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness." And so, beneath the cold water of the Jordan, John laid his hand upon his head. When he rose, the sky opened, and it was said that a dove descended, and a voice came from heaven: "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." That moment marked the beginning of his mission, a turning point at which even nature and humanity seemed to hold their breath. But before he began to preach, Jesus withdrew into the wilderness, 40 days without food, without water, only him and the wind, among rock and sand. It is said that it was a time of trial, when temptation came 3 times power, glory, and pride, the 3 things that haunt every human being. A voice echoed in the desert, "If you are the Son of God, turn this stone into bread." But he replied, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from God." The world has no witness to those days, only a few lines written in the scriptures, but everyone understands that it was not an outward battle, but one within the soul. And when he emerged from the wilderness, Jesus was no longer the carpenter of Nazareth. He had become the bearer of a mission for all humanity. From that point, he began walking through the villages of Galilee, speaking of love, forgiveness, and faith. He did not preach in temples, nor use miracles to impress. He spoke with a voice as soft as wind, about something astonishingly simple: love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. To his listeners, such words were madness. In a world ruled by the Roman Empire, where people believed that power was justice, a man preaching love seemed unbelievable. Yet, strangely enough, the harder it was to believe, the more people came to him. He did not choose scholars or nobles. He chose fishermen, tax collectors, and even sinful women to be his disciples. 12 people, each flawed in his own way, yet in his eyes, each had value. An interesting, often overlooked detail among the first disciples were two brothers, Peter and Andrew, who were from the same village as Jesus. They later recounted that when he called, "Follow me," they dropped their nets and boats and followed immediately, as if their souls had heard that voice long ago. From then on, every step Jesus took across the land of Galilee became legend. He healed the blind with mud, helped the lame walk, and turned water into wine at the wedding in Cana, the first recorded miracle. But if asked why he did it, he simply answered not to prove power, but so that people may know that love is stronger than sickness. Each miracle was a lesson, each conversation a light. And from that day at the Jordan River, the light named Jesus began to illuminate a world lost in the darkness of fear and hatred. He did not call for war nor promise power. He simply said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And perhaps it was precisely that simplicity, so simple that mankind could not accept it, that made the world face the inevitable. When the light shines too brightly, the darkness will begin to fight back. After the waters of the Jordan, everything was different. From an unknown carpenter, Jesus now stepped into the center of faith, not through power or dazzling promises of salvation, but through gentleness and understanding. He began traveling through the regions of Galilee, Samaria, and Judea, preaching about a kingdom no one could see with their eyes, yet everyone could feel with their hearts. The first miracle took place at Cana during an ordinary wedding. When the wine ran out, Mary, his mother, softly said, "My son, they have no more wine." Jesus looked at her and answered quietly, "My hour has not yet come." But then, as though unable to refuse his mother's faith, he told the servants to fill 6 large stone jars with water. When they drew some out, that water had turned into the finest wine of the feast. No thunder, no light from heaven, only something small and subtle. Yet in that silence, the world had just witnessed the first miracle of God. From there, word spread like wind. People began to gather, at first a few dozen, then hundreds, then thousands. They walked from distant villages just to hear him speak, and he spoke of things everyone understood, but few dared to believe. "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." No shouting, no threats, no violence. He simply spoke and made those listening feel as though God himself were speaking directly to them. One of the most remembered miracles was when he healed a paralyzed man in Capernaum. That man could not walk. His friends carried him on a mat, climbed onto the roof, removed the tiles, and lowered him down to where Jesus was preaching. Instead of saying, "Rise and walk," Jesus said, "Your sins are forgiven." The crowd murmured, Who gave him the authority to forgive sins? Jesus looked at the man and said, So that you may know the Son of Man has such authority on earth. Then said, Rise, take your mat, and go. And for the first time in his life, the man walked. The entire house fell silent. No one clapped. They simply watched, caught between awe and fear. During this time, Jesus began to speak in parables, short, everyday stories that carry deep truths. A sower, a prodigal son, a shepherd seeking a lost sheep. Each story began with, There was a man, but ended as a mirror reflecting compassion, forgiveness, and faith. A lesser-known detail in ancient records, Jesus was called Rabbi Teacher, though he had never studied in a religious school. The Pharisees, the conservative priestly class, began to doubt who gave him the right to teach. Meanwhile, ordinary people whispered, He speaks as one with authority, not like the teachers of the law. And that was exactly what made the Jewish leaders afraid, because a man without status, without an army, without money could move people to tears, could make them believe that God was closer than ever before. Miracle followed miracle. He fed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He walked on water to reach his disciples panicking in the stormy night. He called Lazarus back to life after 4 days in the tomb. Yet what was striking was that after each miracle, he often said, Tell no one, as if he did not wish to be worshipped for his power, but to be understood for his love and faith. But the world does not favor things too pure. The fame of Jesus made the powerful feel threatened. They saw in him not a healer, but a rebel with soft power, a man who dared to say that whoever wants to be great must serve others, an idea unthinkable in a society ruled by empire and status. And like every flame that spreads too quickly, the light of Jesus began to attract envious eyes. The Jewish priests whispered among themselves. The Roman authorities watched silently. And Jesus, still walking, still preaching, still healing, knowing well that every path of light must pass through darkness. When his preaching reached its height, Jesus was no longer an unknown man. Every village, every narrow alley echoed with stories of the one who healed with words. Thousands followed him not because of miracles, but because of how he made them believe that even the forgotten were loved by God. But as faith spread, the shadow of power began to move. The Jewish leaders, especially the Pharisees and the high priests, felt threatened. Jesus did not attack them directly, yet every word he spoke was a strike against hypocrisy. When they boasted of keeping the law, he simply replied, The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That seemingly gentle sentence was, in truth, a revolutionary declaration. It said that compassion mattered more than ritual, and that people mattered more than power. From that moment, every step he took was watched. Those in authority feared that the people would proclaim Jesus as the King of Israel, a political threat to the Roman Empire itself. And so, those afraid of losing their positions began to plot, wanting to arrest him, yet fearing the people's reaction. But amid all those schemes, Jesus continued to do what he always did to touch human pain. He spoke with prostitutes, ate with tax collectors, and healed lepers. Those whom society had cast aside suddenly felt seen, heard, and loved. He said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." That sentence, spoken as a woman, was dragged out to be stoned, cut through the silence like a blade, and one by one, the accusers walked away. No more shouting, no more stones, only him and the trembling woman left standing. "I do not condemn you. Go and sin no more." A small, often unnoticed detail, it was precisely these acts of mercy, not the miracles, that enraged the rulers. For one can ignore wonders, but no one can ignore compassion. During those days, Jesus also began to foretell the future. He told his disciples that there would come a time when the Son of Man would be betrayed, killed, and then rise again. The disciples were confused. Peter, the most passionate and loyal, protested, "That cannot be. I will not let that happen." But Jesus looked at him, his eyes gentle yet sad. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." They did not understand. How could one who did good, who loved all, possibly be killed? But Jesus knew well, the brighter the light, the more darkness will try to extinguish it. One day, he entered Jerusalem. The people laid their cloaks on the road, waving palm branches, shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." They thought he was a king, the one who would overthrow Rome and free the Jews from bondage. But he did not ride a horse, nor carry a sword. He rode on a young donkey. That image was a silent proclamation. He came not to rule, but to serve. And while the crowds rejoiced, the priests conspired in secret. "This man must die," they said. "If not, everyone will believe in him, and Rome will punish us." From that moment, death was no longer a possibility. It became a certainty. That night, while the city slept, Jesus looked toward the Temple of Jerusalem. In the moonlight, he saw that what was once the heart of faith had turned into a marketplace filled with merchants, money changers, and deceit. He entered, overturned the tables of the money changers, and cried out, "My Father's house is a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." That was the final drop that overflowed the cup. The next day, the chief priests gathered with Judas Iscariot, one of his 12 disciples, and struck a deal for 30 pieces of silver, so that he might show them where to arrest Jesus. And so, darkness began to close in around the light. But Jesus remained calm. He knew destiny was coming and did not avoid it. For sometimes, to teach mankind about love, God must accept being killed by the very ones he loves. That night, the wind of Jerusalem blew cold through the narrow alleys. Pale moonlight fell upon old stone walls, while in a small upper room, Jesus and his 12 disciples sat around a humble table. They did not know this would be their last meal together, but Jesus knew. He took the bread, broke it, and said, "This is my body, given to you." Then he raised the cup of wine. "This is my blood, poured out so that many may be forgiven." No one fully understood the meaning of those words. They sat in silence under the flicker of the oil lamp, feeling sorrow seep into their hearts. Only Judas, sitting quietly in the corner, glanced at the silver purse hidden in his robe. Jesus looked at him not in anger and said softly, "Go, do what you have decided to do." In that moment, there was no condemnation, only unconditional love, the kind of love only one who knows he is about to lose everything can give. After the meal, Jesus and his disciples left the city, going to the Garden of Gethsemane, where the old olive trees whispered in the wind. He told them to pray while he went a little farther. There, he knelt, his forehead touching the ground, and his prayer rose, trembling like a breath. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." At that moment, more clearly than ever, we see that Jesus too bore human fear. He was not an unmoved symbol, but a heart that knew pain, that knew fear, yet still chose love. One ancient manuscript records, "His sweat fell to the ground like blood." Some may call that a metaphor, but modern medicine calls this hematidrosis, a condition in which, under extreme stress, blood vessels beneath the skin burst, mixing with sweat. It is fear turned into blood, real and terrifying. When he returned, the disciples were asleep. He said softly, "My soul is sorrowful unto death, and you could not keep watch with me even for an hour." Then footsteps echoed in the night. Judas came with soldiers, torches in hand. He approached and placed a kiss upon Jesus' cheek, the signal for the soldiers to seize him. "Judas," he asked, "do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" No one answered. The soldiers bound him. Peter drew his sword and struck, cutting off a man's ear. But Jesus stopped him. "All who draw the sword will die by the sword." Then he touched the soldier's wound and healed it. Even in the moment of his arrest, he healed his enemy. The disciples panicked and fled. Peter slipped into the crowd, following from a distance. When the guards asked, "Weren't you with Jesus?" he quickly replied, "No, I don't know that man." 3 times he said it. And when the rooster crowed, Peter remembered his master's words and burst into tears. Jesus was taken to the house of the high priest Caiaphas, then to the Roman governor. "Pontius Pilate," Pilate asked, "are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You say that I am." Pilate looked at him, finding no crime deserving death, and sought to release him. But the crowd shouted, "Crucify him!" A strange, lesser-known detail according to the custom of that time. During the Passover festival, the Roman governor could pardon one prisoner. Pilate brought out 2 men before the people, Jesus and Barabbas, a murderer. "Whom do you want me to release to you?" he asked. The crowd cried out, "Barabbas." Pilate asked again, "Then what shall I do with this one called the Messiah?" The answer thundered, "Crucify him." Pilate washed his hands before the crowd and said, "I am innocent of this man's blood." Yet he still handed Jesus over to the soldiers, afraid of a riot. And thus, from the quiet garden of Gethsemane, the light officially stepped into the darkness, but not to be extinguished, rather, to turn that very darkness into the testimony of love. That morning, the sky over Jerusalem was shrouded in a heavy gray. Jesus was led through the narrow streets, his back bent under the weight of a cross made of olive wood, the very thing that would become the symbol of all humanity. People pushed, shouted, threw stones, and spat. But amid the chaos of the crowd, there were still silent tears from the women of Galilee, the disciples hiding in the shadows, and a Mother Mary walking behind her son, her eyes filled with tears. It is said that when he fell for the third time, a man named Simon of Cyrene was forced by the soldiers to help carry the cross for the remaining distance. Simon had no idea he was touching history. He was merely a passerby, drawn into the greatest story of humankind, and from then on, his name was etched into the memory of millions of believers. At Golgotha, the place of the skull, they stripped him of his garments and nailed his hands and feet to the wood. No one knows exactly how tall Jesus was, but the cross then stood about 3 meters high. When it was raised upright, the entire city seemed to hold its breath. Above his head, they fastened a sign written in 3 languages, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. It was not meant as honor, but as mockery. 2 thieves were crucified beside him. One sneered, "If you are the Messiah, save yourself and us as well." The other whispered softly, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered, his voice weak but calm, "Today, you will be with me in paradise." A rarely mentioned detail, archaeologists have found evidence that Roman crosses were not as tall as later drawings depicted, but just high enough for the condemned to be at eye level with the crowd. They wanted to see the suffering, to witness death as a spectacle. And in that spectacle, Jesus did not curse. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." No one had ever spoken such words from the cross. No one had ever forgiven while being killed. At noon, the sky grew dark, the sun dimmed, as if the entire universe bowed its head. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus whispered, "I thirst." A soldier dipped a sponge in vinegar and lifted it to him on a spear. He drank, then uttered his final words, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. The earth shook. The Temple of Jerusalem split its great veil, the one separating the holy from the most holy, a symbolic sign that the barrier between man and God had been torn away. A Roman centurion, witnessing everything, murmured, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." That afternoon, Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Jewish council, quietly went to Pilate to ask for permission to take down the body. Pilate was surprised. Is he already dead? Joseph wrapped the body in linen, laid it in a new tomb hewn from stone, and rolled a large rock to seal the entrance. Outside, Mary and a few other women knelt in silence, saying nothing. Darkness fell over Jerusalem, heavy as ash. The world thought everything was over, but within that silence, something was changing, quietly yet eternally. Those who had once hated him began to feel remorse. Peter, who had denied his master, wept bitterly. And Mary, the mother who had lost her son, still believed that God would never let death be the final word. 3 days later, that faith would be proven true. 3 days after the tomb had been sealed, Jerusalem awoke to an uncanny stillness. No more shouting crowds, no clattering of soldiers' spears, only the soft wind blowing across the slope of Golgotha, where the cross still stood, bare and silent. But elsewhere, A miracle was about to unfold. Early in the morning, while it was still misty, Mary Magdalene and several other women brought spices to the tomb. They worried, "Who will roll away the stone for us?" But when they arrived, the stone had already been rolled aside. Inside, the tomb was empty. Only the linen cloth remained, neatly folded where his head had lain. They stood in shock. Then a man in white garments appeared and said, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen." Those words, short as they were, shook the world. Death, which seemed a period, turned out to be only the first comma of eternity. Mary ran to tell the disciples. Peter and John immediately raced to the tomb. They saw, believed, but did not yet understand. That evening, while the disciples trembled in a locked room, Jesus appeared among them, not through a door, not in a flash of light, but in perfect peace. He said, "Peace be with you." Then he raised his hands, showing them the marks of the nails. No one could speak. Only tears fell upon the stone floor. A week later, when Thomas, the doubter, said that he would not believe unless he touched the wounds himself, Jesus appeared again and said, "Put your hand here and do not doubt anymore." Thomas fell to his knees and cried out, "My Lord and my God." The story of the resurrection is not merely religion, it is the affirmation that love is stronger than death. It is no longer a single miracle, but proof of faith itself that light, even when buried in stone, still finds its way back. In the weeks that followed, Jesus met his disciples many times. He ate with them, taught them, and reminded them, "Go into all the world and preach the good news to all nations." And one morning, on a hill near Bethany, he lifted his face toward heaven and was taken up in a radiance as bright as dawn. The disciples watched him ascend, no longer afraid, for they knew their master had not left them, only changed the way he was present. A strange detail recorded in early writings says, at the very moment he ascended, a strong wind swept across the fields, and olive blossoms fell white across the hillside, as if the earth itself were bidding farewell to heaven. From that moment on, the world was never the same again. Fishermen became apostles. Those who once feared became bearers of the light. Peter, John, Paul, they carried that story everywhere, and from the dusty streets of Galilee, faith spread across the world. A faith that began with a child in a manger, condemned as a criminal, but ended as hope for billions. And if you ask, how could one man change the history of humanity? The answer lies not in power, but in the way he loved. Out of love, he was born among the lowly. Out of love, he died among his enemies. And out of love, he returned not to seek revenge, but to speak only one sentence: "I am with you always, even to the end of the world." Night has fallen. Imagine the stillness of the land of Galilee, a soft breeze rippling across the lake, reflecting the moonlight like a silver mirror. There, once, a man had walked along the water's edge, speaking of love, forgiveness, and peace. He left behind no castle, no throne, not a single line written by his own hand. Yet his words, for more than 2,000 years, have continued to echo in the hearts of humankind, every every time someone forgives, every time someone chooses love over hate. The light of Jesus Christ shines once more. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all, that the light has never gone out.